today we are going to do a little unboxing and hopefully start the install of my RalliTEK 1-inch springs. And I talked about these a little bit a few videos ago, and the reasoning why I wanted to try these guys out. Basically, I started looking at springs because of the extra weight I added to the front of the car with the LPaventure front bar and skid plate. It's about 48 pounds extra weight up there. And I noticed that weight a little bit. And the big thing is, like I mentioned, I think it was in the 10,000 mile update, and the reason why I really want to get a lift is because I lost about 1.5 inches of ground clearance, and I was really noticing I was rubbing the skid plate quite often, a lot more and on things that I shouldn't. So you wouldn't think 1.5 inches would make all that difference off-road, but with the rocks and stuff around here, I wanted to get the car back up in the air. So this is a quicker and cheaper way to get a little bit of height for now, and then I will do the lift a little bit further down the road. So these guys were actually on sale. I saved, it was about 40 bucks and free shipping. So it was 400 bucks instead of 440. And the thing that RalliTEK says about these springs is they'll give you about 1 inch of height, and they will maintain as much as possible the stock ride quality. And so if you like to overload your car, or you just have a lot of extra accessories on the car, this is a good way to go, just to kind of prevent you from sagging, basically. Let's open this up and possibly get started on the install today. I have the spring tool that I need. Never done springs before, or never taken struts and springs out. Does not look that difficult for the front. The rears may be a little bit more challenging, but I should be able to do it. And I have a lot of resources in case I need to get some help with that. I am hoping that they include detailed instructions, because as you all know, if you've done upgrades in the past or other things, a lot of companies don't really provide very good instructions on how to do stuff. And the one thing I was really concerned about was torque values, and I did find RalliTEK actually does list them in their blog, so I have those. So that's cool. All right. And I'll do a comparison when I get the other ones out as well, so you can see the difference between the springs, what they look like. Sticker. Mandatory these days, I think. And of course, no directions. Awesome. I'm gonna go get the car up on jack stands and start working on the fronts first, and then I'll do the rears. So thanks for watching. Let's get to the install. All right, guys, so I have the car up on jack stands, and I'm just gonna show you real quick what we need to remove. ABS line, just pinch it, pull it off, pinch back here. You need a 12mm socket to remove the brake line. These two bolts here are 19mm. This is the camber bolt, so we're actually going to mark it, which is what is the top, just so we know, so it's close, so when I go to get an alignment after I'm done with all this, at least it's not totally whacked driving over. And then you also need to remove the end link bolt that's attached to the strut mount. And this is the brand new spring and strut that was just installed because of my crazy noise. But that's pretty much it. And then we'll go up to the top and release the 3 nuts up there. And I don't remember the size off the top of my head right now, but we'll go over that when we get up there. All right, so we got the 219s off here. Again, ABS is off. 12mm nut for the brake line. And then I took out that is a 17mm for the end link, which is this guy. And now I'm gonna pop these out. Be sure and support the brake rotor with a jack or jack stand, because it will slide down once both bolts are out. Okay. So you can see how by taking those two bolts out, that just kind of the brake disc caliper slid forward. So now this is free. So now we're going to go up top and we're going to loosen up the bolts that are up there. So it's these 3 nuts here, and what we're going to do now is we're going to actually remove 2 of them completely, and you're going to loosen the 3rd one almost to where it's off, and then you're going to grab a hold of the top of the strut before you remove that last one so it doesn't slip all the way down. Once the strut is released, here make sure that you take out the jack stand or the jack or whatever you have holding that brake caliper, if you still do, so that thing can extend all the way down. You have enough room to pull the strut out either side. Just be careful of the ABS line and the brake line. Now that we have the strut completely removed, we need to work on compressing the spring so that we can loosen the top hat and then remove the old spring and put the new spring on. And the way that that works is up top there is a strut nut, which is a 17 millimeter, and you also need a 6 millimeter hex key. And what you do is you stick the hex key inside the hole there and then turn the nut and loosen it. And obviously by looking at that you can see you can't use a regular socket. So if you don't have an impact gun, you can use a set of these, which are called pass-through sockets. And you can see there's a hole in the wrench and allows you to pass an Allen key or a screwdriver or something else through it. And this is what I used. And it worked great on the passenger side, but the driver's side ended up being a total nightmare, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So here, what I'm doing is setting up the tool to compress the springs. And if you've never used these before, make sure you get someone to show you how to use it. They can be dangerous. This was my first time using them. And once you get a quick tutorial, they're not hard to use. You just need to make sure everything's secure and even on both sides, and compress each or tighten each bolt slowly on each side equally as you move your way down. So we're not going to go into great detail on how to do this. I'm not going to show you how this all works, but basically you tighten these down until the spring is compressed enough to release pressure on the little top hat, and then you can loosen that nut and then remove the top hat. Like I said, put the new spring on after you remove the old one. Quick look at a strut, and I want to tell you the difference between a strut and a shock. So there's the dust cover, a little damper inside, and this whole unit here is a strut. And the main difference between a strut and a shock is a strut is an integral part of your suspension system, whereas the shock is not. It just kind of dampers things. This is also important for alignments and things of that nature. So it's very important after you do this kind of thing to get your car aligned, or at least have it checked. So the new spring will slip on like this, even though right here I have it upside down. But it does go on just like that. We need to compress this spring now so that we can get it small enough so that the top hat will fit on and we can get that strut nut back on the top. Here's a quick look at the bottom of the strut. You can see how the pigtail fits in there nice and snug in that bottom pad there. And it'll be very obvious when you're putting these on which direction they go. And then this next part here, this is the actual strut mount or top hat. You can call it different things, but when in my last video I told you about my suspension problem, and this is the part that Subaru does the TSB on. And this part was very, very rusty on my car, and they think all that rust got into the bearing that's inside of this thing, because it's supposed to spin freely. And if it's not, they're thinking possibly the shock was getting bound up, and then the noise was the shock kind of releasing and going back into place. We're not 100% sure on that, but that's an idea of what could have been going on. My noise is now gone though, since they replaced these things on both sides. Alright, so same deal with the spring compressors, just evenly contract them. You can use a drill gun or a drill driver to do this faster, but I stuck with the socket wrench initially just to be safe, and then switched to that later once I got more comfortable. But again, compressing this enough to where you can get the top hat on there and get the nut tight. Here is the top hat assembled and on the strut. Take a look at how many threads are showing, and before you remove this the first time, make sure that you take a good look and see how tight that nut is, because the first time I did it, I did not compress it enough, the spring enough, and this is where I stopped, because I thought, oh, I don't have any more room to get it down. It was because I didn't compress the spring enough. So make sure you get that spring fully compressed so that you can screw that nut on all the way like it's supposed to be. Here's another quick tip so you can avoid a mistake that I made. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see I still have my jack stand supporting the arm there. And I tried to get the strut into the car, and I could get it into the top no problem, but then could not get it in position on the caliper because that jack stand was limiting the mobility of the caliper to go down and forward. So don't do that. Get that out of the way so you have all the movement you can, and then the strut will go back in with no problems. So reinstall is exactly the way you took it out. Insert the strut, and what I did here is I fed it through the top, get the 14mm nuts on top loosely tightened so it hangs the strut up there, come back down, move the jack stand out of the way, unlike I did the first time, and then put the strut in position and then tighten everything back up. Remember when you put your camber bolt back in to line up the mark that you made on it with the mark on the strut so that it's at least close so you can get the car over for an alignment. Here's everything back in place. The lower strut nuts are bolted on, the camber bolt in the correct position. Here you get an idea of what the spring looks like now. It's a nice pretty blue color. So I will have the torque values in the description, or at least some links to what I use for torque values. But you've got the two lower nuts there. You've got the camber bolt mark. On the other side, you're going to put your ABS in place. You're going to redo your end link, and then also your brake bolt. Up top here, you just have your three 14mm bolts. And then, of course, you can see the top of the strut there and our new cap. All right, I mentioned earlier that the passenger side strut nut ended up being a total pain. And from the get-go, I should have just borrowed somebody's impact wrench. I don't have one at home. So initially, I used a vice grip and the Allen key, and it worked fine on the driver's side. But no matter what I did, I even had help at work, we tried to get that passenger side off, and all we ended up doing was stripping out the Allen key area of the strut top. So at that point, I should have just got an air gun to get it out. But instead, I decided to cut the nut out, which was, let me tell you, a lot of fun because there's just no room using a Dremel in there. But I finally got it off. Needless to say, I got a new nut and reattached it. But even with the pass-through sockets, it didn't work trying to retighten that side because that Allen key area was stripped. So I used an impact gun and got it to go. To get access to the top of the strut back here, you need to remove your pad and this top piece. And what you're going to do is you're going to use equal pressure and just kind of pull that up. This one doesn't hold very tight. And you're going to do this on both sides. And so you need to remove this little guy. And basically all you do is just pull it out. And then here is your cap. The strut, top of the strut nut is in there. And then these are your two nuts that hold the whole assembly from below. And that's pretty much it. So here in the back, it's very similar to the front. What we're going to work on, we're going to take off the brake cable. You have to release the ABS line as well to protect it. And then you also want to remove the end link. It's a little bit smaller back here. And then as far as there's only one strut nut on this side. So some people say that you should drop the subframe. It makes it easier to get this out. But what I did was a little bit different, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. We now have the passenger side RalliTEK spring in place. So let me tell you just how I did this since I wasn't dropping the subframe, and I talked about it a little bit earlier. What I ended up doing is I ended up pulling this bolt here. That allows this whole arm to come down, and I also loosened the one on the caliper here, and obviously you have to loosen or take out the strut bolt. But you pull that bolt, loosen this one, this arm comes out, allows you just to lift the strut out without any problems, and this wasn't difficult to get back in either. Just had to use a screwdriver to line up the hole. Torqued everything back down, and I'll leave in the description the two sources that I used for torque values. Reattach the end link over here, attach the strut, put the ABS wire back where it goes, also the brake wire, and really that's it. And of course the two top hat nuts on top, and this guy is good to go. I got everything buttoned up. So removing the driver's side is the same as passenger side, other than this little guy. You have to remove this with one little nut from the control arm or trailing arm. The rest of the removal is the same. I loosened the nut on the caliper. The strut nut in the middle has to be removed, and then I removed that last nut and bolt in the back. And it goes in just like the other side. Quick and easy, no problems. Alrighty, so I just had the car aligned and everything seemed to go pretty well. I guess the toe was out quite a bit. And they said the caster and camber is close, that they couldn't quite get it into spec. And my guess is because I torqued everything down while the car was still up in the air, and according to RalliTEK and some of the other lift folks that I've read, you're supposed to actually loosen everything up when it's on the ground and then re-torque it. Now the problem with that is I don't have a lift here at home, so I did not do that. He's saying it's just barely out, so I'm gonna let it roll for a little bit. Let's talk driving feel and numbers. First and foremost, the front did not come up quite 1 inch. It was 3/4 of an inch, or 19 millimeters. And the rear was 35.5 millimeters, or 1.4 inches about. So got a little bit more height in the rear than in the front. But overall, I'm happy with it. And of course, I got about 3/4 of an inch higher underneath at the skid plate, which was really what my goal was, is to get that up in the air a little bit more. Obviously, I need to go a little bit higher than that. And when I do the lift, I think together with the springs will be really nice. The driving feel is actually awesome. I really, really like it. Can't complain about that at all. It feels way better than stock. And any of that heaviness in the front end is now gone, and that is a really cool thing. So first impressions are very positive, and we'll see how it goes the longer I drive it, and I will keep you updated as soon as I get off-road with the setup. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Questions, comments, send me an email or leave it below. Talk to you soon.